Hong Kong, the concrete jungle that amazes the world. Here, billion-dollar skyscrapers cast shadows over the famous coffin homes, a city that became a global cinematic icon and helped inspire some of the most famous visions of futuristic cities ever created. But it is also a city whose future remains surrounded by uncertainty. Why is the year 2047 so important? What could happen when that date arrives? To this day, the model known as one country, two systems still remains in place, and its fate is considered by many to be a barometer for the future of relations between East and West. How did a small British colony become one of the richest places in Asia? Why did its population develop an identity so different from the rest of China? And why did millions of people decide to challenge one of the most powerful governments in the world? To understand what Hong Kong has become, we need to understand the moment when an entire generation's patience reached its limit. September 26, 2014. Hong Kong became the stage for one of the largest pro-democracy movements in its history. What began as a student-led mobilization organized by the Hong Kong Federation of Students quickly evolved into a massive popular movement that would become known around the world as the Umbrella Revolution. The protesters demanded more open elections for Hong Kong's chief executive, without candidates being pre-screened by Beijing. For many of them, this was a promise made when the former British colony was returned to China in 1997. When police used tear gas to disperse the crowds, demonstrators began using umbrellas for protection. The images spread across the world. For 79 days, between September and December of 2014, thousands of people occupied key areas of the city, defending what they considered an essential part of Hong Kong's autonomy. But that would not be the last time the population took to the streets. In April of 2019, Hong Kong's government, led by Carrie Lam, introduced a bill that would allow criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China. Although the proposal was introduced by Hong Kong's government, many protesters believed it reflected a growing alignment between the territory and Beijing. The measure could expose Hong Kong residents to unfair trials, increase Beijing's influence over the territory, and even be used against activists and journalists. In June, hundreds of thousands of people began protesting. The demonstrations quickly grew. Millions of people took part in the movement. In August, protests at Hong Kong International Airport led to the cancellation of hundreds of flights, and once again drew the world's attention. Public pressure became so intense that Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, announced the indefinite suspension of the bill. The protesters succeeded in preventing the extradition law from being passed, but the events of the following years showed that the struggle was far from over. In 2020, China's central government enacted a new national security law for Hong Kong. The measure expanded the authorities' powers to combat activities considered separatist, subversive, or threats to national security. In the months that followed, pro-democracy organizations were dissolved, numerous activists were arrested or left the city, and the massive demonstrations that had mobilized millions of people virtually disappeared from the streets. These events revealed a reality that was becoming increasingly clear. Although Hong Kong retained characteristics that set it apart from the rest of China, Beijing was not willing to relinquish control over the territory. But how did a Chinese city develop an identity so different from the rest of the country? To answer that question, we need to go back more than 150 years. At that time, Hong Kong was far removed from the modern metropolis we know today. The region consisted of small fishing communities scattered across islands and coastal areas on the southern edge of the Chinese Empire. Few people could have imagined that this territory would one day become one of the most important financial centers on the planet. But everything began to change during the 19th century. At that time, China exported enormous quantities of tea, silk, and porcelain to Europe. The problem was that the Chinese had little interest in Western goods. As a result, vast amounts of silver flowed out of the United Kingdom to pay for Chinese products. Seeking to balance this trade relationship, the British began selling opium produced in India to China. The drug's consumption grew rapidly and eventually triggered a severe social and economic crisis in the country. When the Chinese government decided to crack down on the trade and destroy shipments of opium, the conflict with the British Empire escalated into war. The British possessed a far more modern navy and ultimately emerged victorious. In 1842, China's defeat forced it to sign the Treaty of Nanking. Under the terms of the agreement, Hong Kong Island was ceded to the British Crown, but that would only be the first change. Years later, a second war involving China, the United Kingdom, and France ended with new treaties that further expanded the territory controlled by the British. The Kowloon Peninsula would also come under British administration. What began as a small colonial possession would soon become one of the most important ports in Asia. Over the decades, Hong Kong developed under laws, institutions, and economic models that differed from those found in the rest of China. As the territory grew into a major commercial and financial center, entire generations were born and raised under British rule. Over time, Hong Kong ceased to be merely a Chinese territory administered by the British. It began to develop its own identity, an identity shaped by both Chinese and Western influences. This situation would continue for more than 150 years, until July 1st, 1997, when Hong Kong was officially returned to the People's Republic of China. The transfer took place under the principle of one country, two systems. In theory, Hong Kong would continue to be part of China, but it would retain its own laws, economic system, and many of the characteristics that distinguished it from the rest of the country. And it was precisely there that the next chapter of this story began. If you've ever watched movies such as Bloodsport, Blade Runner, or countless action and science fiction productions, you've probably seen cities inspired by Hong Kong. For decades, its narrow streets, traditional markets, glowing signs, and impressive forest of skyscrapers helped create such a distinctive visual identity that it influenced filmmakers and artists around the world. But that identity goes far beyond the movies. It can be seen in the small details of everyday life. While most of China primarily uses Mandarin and simplified Chinese characters, Cantonese remains the most widely spoken language in Hong Kong, and traditional Chinese characters can still be found on signs, storefronts, and official documents. As you walk through the city's streets, it is also common to see signs written in both Chinese and English, a legacy of the period when Hong Kong was under British administration. That influence can also be seen in left-hand traffic, the iconic red double-decker buses, the trams that have crossed the island for more than a century, and even in the legal system, which has preserved characteristics inspired by the British model. Few places in the world have managed to combine elements of East and West so harmoniously. The result is a city that remains deeply Chinese in its roots, while developing a unique personality over more than 150 years of a remarkable history. And this identity did not only transform Hong Kong's culture, it also helped build one of Asia's most powerful economies. Today, Hong Kong is considered one of the world's leading financial centers. Its stock exchange is among the largest on the planet. Thousands of international companies maintain offices in the city, and its port helped turn the territory into one of the main gateways for trade in Asia. But there is an interesting detail. Despite all this wealth, Hong Kong faces a problem that has profoundly shaped its history: a lack of space. Much of the territory consists of mountains, protected natural areas, and rugged terrain. As a result, only a relatively small portion of its total land area is used for urban development. And it was precisely this limitation that led Hong Kong to grow in an unusual way. Instead of expanding outward, the city began growing upward. Today, more than 9,000 buildings rise above 14 stories, creating one of the most impressive urban skylines on Earth. At night, the illuminated skyscrapers create such a striking image that it has become one of the most recognizable cityscapes in the world. Not surprisingly, this combination of urban density, neon lights, and towering glass buildings helped inspire countless depictions of futuristic cities in film and popular culture. But the city's shortage of space produced something even more extraordinary. For much of the 20th century, a small area of the Kowloon Peninsula was home to one of the most densely populated places in human history. A place so unusual that it seemed straight out of a science fiction movie. Kowloon Walled City. Originally, it was an ancient Chinese military fortress. Over time, the area evolved into a kind of enclave with an unusual legal status. Although it was surrounded by British-administered territory, its special condition meant that, for decades, government control remained extremely limited. Taking advantage of this administrative vacuum, criminal organizations known as the Triads exerted influence over the area for many years. At the same time, Kowloon Walled City became a refuge for thousands of ordinary people, seeking affordable housing in an increasingly expensive and overcrowded city. Buildings were constructed virtually on top of one another, forming a massive block of dark, damp concrete. On the lower floors, sunlight rarely reached the residents, who relied on artificial lighting for much of the day. The buildings grew as high as 14 stories, and the main limitation preventing even taller structures was the proximity of Kai Tak Airport, where aircraft passed just a few meters above the rooftops during their final approach. Without adequate sanitation, and with few public services, residents themselves created solutions to keep the community functioning. Inside Kowloon Walled City were hundreds of small factories, dental clinics, butcher shops, workshops, restaurants, and even schools, all operating informally within a complex maze of corridors and stairways. In 1993, following agreements between the governments involved, Kowloon Walled City was completely demolished. In its place emerged Kowloon Walled City Park, a peaceful green space that preserves remnants of the old fortress and commemorates the history of one of the most extraordinary places ever to exist in Hong Kong. Kowloon Walled City disappeared in 1993, but Hong Kong's lack of space did not disappear with it. Today, some people live in apartments so small that they barely seem habitable. In some cases, the entire living space is smaller than a parking spot. And although the city has been completely transformed since the days of Kowloon, the need to make use of every square foot remains part of daily life for millions of residents. The so-called box apartments have become one of the most recognizable symbols of Hong Kong's housing crisis. Inside them, a single room may serve simultaneously as a bedroom, living room, kitchen, and office. Foldable furniture, retractable beds, and creative storage solutions help maximize every available inch. For many residents, this is the only way to continue living in one of the most expensive cities on Earth. But if living in Hong Kong is so expensive, who are the people occupying these tiny apartments? The answer lies in the city's job market. Contrary to what many people imagine, Hong Kong is not a major industrial center. Most jobs are concentrated in the service sector. Millions of people work in areas such as retail, restaurants, hotels, logistics, education, technology, and financial services. Many of these workers have ordinary jobs and live routines similar to those of millions of people in other major cities around the world. The difference is that, in Hong Kong, housing costs can consume a significant portion of a person's income. As a result, it is not uncommon to find people living in extremely compact apartments while working in modern office buildings, shopping centers, banks, or technology companies. But this reality does not represent the entire city. Hong Kong is also home to some of the most luxurious and valuable real estate in Asia. Areas such as the Peak, located on the slopes of Victoria Peak, are known for their mansions and high-end apartments with privileged views of the city and its harbor. Meanwhile, neighborhoods such as Repulse Bay, Deepwater Bay, and Stanley attract affluent residents seeking spacious homes, exclusive residential communities, and a lifestyle very different from that found in the city's most densely populated districts. As a result, Hong Kong is a city of remarkable contrasts. On one side, residents trying to make use of every available square foot. On the other, some of the most expensive residential properties on the planet. But despite these differences, there is one characteristic shared by much of the city's population: a sense of safety. Hong Kong is frequently ranked among the safest cities in the world. Rates of violent crime remain relatively low compared to those of many other major international cities. Crimes such as homicide, armed robbery, and kidnapping are uncommon, and much of the population moves around the city with a strong sense of security, even at night. But one question continues to hang over the city's future. When Hong Kong was returned to China in 1997, it was established that the principle known as one country, two systems would remain in effect for 50 years. That period will end in 2047, and that date raises a question whose outcome no one can predict with certainty. Will Hong Kong be able to preserve the identity it has built through more than a century of British influence? Will its European roots remain visible in the city's laws, customs, and way of life? Or will Beijing seek to integrate Hong Kong more deeply into the rest of China? Will new protests once again fill the streets? Or will none of that happen, with the city continuing on its current path without major conflicts? Could Hong Kong attempt to declare independence at some point in the future? For now, nobody knows. Only time will be able to answer those questions. And what about you? What do you believe will happen to Hong Kong after 2047? Share your opinion in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.